What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with S.W.O.R.D. Yes, we are getting caught up on all the X-Men stuff. So a little bit of a refresher here for those of you guys who are a little behind on this. Dawn of X was like the official launch of X-Men after House and Powers of X. And then Dawn of X ended with 10 of Swords, and now we're in Reign of X. Now, we did cover the beginning of S.W.O.R.D. issue number 1, and that led directly into the events of King in Black. So honestly, all the stuff we covered in King of Black basically covers everything that more or less appears in S.W.O.R.D. Not overly important, but the end of issue number 1 basically concluded with a group called the Six, right? These kind of select beings who each served a unique purpose among the mutant race, being sent into what was basically the realm of the cosmic entities in order to retrieve an artifact. And then they returned with it. And then we basically pick up here with issue number 5, or issues 5 and 6. Now, one of the things that goes on is we pick up with what you can call them the Snarks. Technically, they're called the Zenriks. I don't know. 25 years reading comics, man. I've never been able to pronounce these guys' names right? They first appeared with Power Pack back in 1984. They're okay. I mean, they're obsessed with like collecting mutant powers, basically, is really all it is, and just kind of enhancing it that way. But they are, in effect, a kind of warring race that's composed of a bunch of different tribes. So imagine if like the Spartans here on Earth were not gathered together in Sparta, but were found in like different locations around the world, and they all waged war against each other, but they were all unified by a singular emperor. Now, the way this works is that each one of the factions is basically ruled by a queen, and in the case that the emperor dies, the factions end up engaging in what's called a Snark war, and that basically leads to the son of the ruling faction becoming the new emperor. Now, the reason why this is so horrifying from around the universe for a lot of people who are out there is because when it comes to the Snark wars, they take no prisoners, right? They will like literally conquer whole worlds and use them as like a staging ground to kind of continue their war against themselves. And everybody gets a piece of that pie, whether they want it or not. That's just the way it is. And so because of that, with them being a pretty powerful and interstellar race, all of them going to war with each other is pretty extreme. The issue here is one of them is basically taken out by an assassin. And that's going to be the kind of thing that goes on among this race. Now, that's not an overly important part here, but it is a bit of an important part. And we'll talk about why that matters here in a minute. Instead, what we do is we switch over to Fabian Cortez, right? Now, Fabian Cortez, we had talked about him in the first S.W.O.R.D. video, and he got his claim to fame by being an acolyte, right? And the acolytes are basically these people out there who just believed wholeheartedly in Magneto. Fabian Cortez was one of those. And in fact, he was kind of the guy who principally worshiped Magneto more so than anybody else. Now, in the aftermath of X-Men Volume 2 and the years that came after that with the various X-Men stories that Marvel wrote, the character of Fabian Cortez began to change a lot. So much so that he was almost completely removed from his role when he originally appeared and became somebody vastly different. More recently, he was brought on board the S.W.O.R.D., really their base of operations called the Peak, as kind of like their head of medicine, just because of the fact that his power is to heal people. But ultimately, he was killed during the events of King in Black, and of course, they've resurrected him here. The funny thing is that, for the most part, Fabian Cortez is kind of a dick, and no one really likes him at all. Like, nobody likes him. So much so that whenever a person is usually resurrected during the events of Krakoa, assuming they're not resurrecting like 10 at one time, then that person kind of receives a bit of a resurrection party, right? Kind of like, hey, congratulations, it's good to have you back, that kind of a thing. Fabian Cortez doesn't get that. No one's there except for Jean Grey. And she's like, the council wants to talk to you. And that's it, right? It's like the least ceremonious resurrection process ever. So that gives you an indication of how much they hate this guy. When he gets to the council, though, the reason why they have such a strong disdain is made quite apparent because he puts on this sort of grandiose speech, right? I mean, the guy's standing naked, pulls his hair back into a bun, and basically starts talking to them about the idea of eliminating humanity. Now, it's kind of an interesting thing because from his perspective, the second law that exists out there among Krakoa, which is you cannot harm humanity, is a backwards law. And a lot of this is rooted in Fabian Cortez's extreme views that he's had over the course of his life, which is humanity gets what it deserves, right? That humanity has routinely screwed over the mutant population, so why should we do them any favors, right? Why should we keep from eradicating them, right? In a lot of ways, it's kind of Magneto's old ideas that have been brought to bear here. And that's one of the elements of Fabian Cortez that never changed over the course of his history in Marvel Comics, right? When he first showed up, he was avidly against the entire human population. He was wholly pro-Magneto, right? Magneto was right that when it comes to the human race, humanity needs to end, right? Humanity will either end because of its own choices, because of the fact that it obliterates itself in its own conflicts, or humanity will end because we will will destroy it. At the end of the day, we as the mutant population are the rightful dominant race. And that's kind of the funny thing. He's like, I'm not approaching that from the perspective of just believing that we're holier than thou. I'm not approaching it from the perspective of I've somehow given myself that authority. He's like, just even from an evolutionary standpoint, that's the case. He says, you yourself, Charles Xavier, had advocated and argued on multiple occasions that we are the next stage in human evolution. And if the human race really wanted to peacefully coexist with the mutant population, we wouldn't have to worry about people infiltrating Krakoa and trying to take us out. We wouldn't have to worry about organizations like Orcus. None of that would happen. And so he says, like, at the end of the day, like, they're going to die, right? If anything, we're acting is not really, he doesn't really say Kevorkian in a traditional sense, but he's like, if anything, we're just aiding them in their own suicide, or we're aiding them in their own deaths. They're going to die, right? Just because of the fact that humans don't have the ability to resurrect themselves, and they have all these instruments and weapons of war, right? These giant war machines, they will obliterate themselves in due time. Now, here's the funny thing about this. Cortez makes some good points. He makes some very, very good and salient points. Humanity will inevitably end, right? It will come to an end. And so why not simply just get them out of the way now? Now, of course, one of the things that's the entire basis of Krakoa is that kind of hidden plan, right? This only known among Moira McTaggart, Charles Xavier, and Magneto. Nobody else really knows, not even we know the underlying current and what they're actually planning here. Presumably, it's to prevent the extinction of the mutant population at the hands of regular humanity, as well as the really advanced humans that we know are in the vault, as we saw it play out in House and Powers of X. The problem is that in the middle of all that, you end up having this kind of last individual who's basically killed, at least as far as the Zenrex go, this last person that stands in the way of this queen kind of ruling, or at least her offspring going to be the one that becomes a new emperor. And of course, that person is killed by Amelia Vaught. Now, Amelia Vaught has a long history of Marvel Comics. The reality is, unless you're a big fan of the history of Charles Xavier, her name is largely lost on you. And even then, when this particular person, right, Gylar, when they believe that like the day is saved, Amelia kills them too, right? And there's a reason why these individuals are being systematically hunted down. But Amelia, to kind of give you guys a quick little explanation here, Amelia was at one point a love interest of Charles Xavier. She ended up defecting when the whole thing with the acolytes and all that stuff popped off, but she's been a kind of on-again, off-again ally of Charles Xavier and the X-Men. More enemy than ally, but she's still kind of been there as an ally from time to time. The fact that she's here indicates that she is, going to have a much larger role in what's going on. And in fact, she is, right? She's going to have a huge role in what's happening. But to kind of wrap up that little bit of a plot thread there, right, with these, Zenrex aliens kind of being eliminated, that Amelia is the one who's doing it, right? Now, a lot of that's also just Marvel kind of wrapping up the idea of this alien race that in reality appeared in the old Power Pack stories, and it's just kind of been lingering around ever since. There's no real reason for their existence. There's no purpose for them outside of the role that they might play later on, which of course we'll talk about a bit. But what you end up getting here is this question, kind of switching back to Fabian Cortez, this question that's posed by Peeper. Now, Peeper, of course, we talked about him in the first S.W.O.R.D video. He's a long-standing member of Magneto's kind of Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Him and Magneto have known each other for a long time, so much so that Magneto trusts him implicitly. And so he kind of asked the question of Fabian Cortez, what's your mutant name? And Fabian Cortez sticks with the idea, my name is Cortez. My family's descended from royalty, that we bent continents to our whim, that I was shunned and I was exiled. My sister and I, we were basically cast aside because of the fact that we weren't really deemed to be part of humanity because we were mutants. We were ostracized for that reason. But at the end of the day, I am still Cortez, right? That name belongs to me and I took it upon myself. The reason why this line of questioning and this conversation between Peeper and Fabian Cortez matters is because Fabian Cortez does not really see himself as part of the mutant population because he doesn't identify as one. If he truly identified as part of the mutant population, he would have cast aside his human name like everybody else has and then adopt his mutant name unto himself. Magneto started off as just Magneto, right? But that's officially his name now. And that's the point that Peeper makes, that a lot of the names that we have now, we had those because they were call signs or they were just monikers that we used at one point along the line in our existence as we fought against the X-Men or for the X-Men, whatever the case is. But we have taken those monikers, those call signs, and we've adopted them as our actual names because we recognize as members of this mutant nation, we need to have that kind of mutant individuality. And so because of that, in reality, despite the salient points that he makes, Fabian Cortez's entire argument here falls on deaf ears. This is really exemplified most when Magneto steps up and says, today you talk of murder, right? You talk of murdering humanity. You talk of killing humanity, wiping them off the face of the map. I know murder. I have committed murder countless times over the course of my life. Murder, in the simplest terms, is a choice. I have made that choice many, many times in the passion of an instant and in the cold, calculated length. But such choices were made in a time long past. We are here and it is now. If I were to make that choice again for any reason, I would face exile and face it gladly, for we must be a nation of laws. And he says, I have listened to how you've suffered at human hands, to your reasons. Do me one favor, Cortez, look me in the eye and tell me that they're greater than mine. And the whole point behind that, right? The whole point of Magneto making that case is for him to basically say, you come to me with this argument of the terrible things that you've had humanity do to you and how humanity needs to end, not just because of what they've done to you, but because of what they've done to other mutants. But all this is rooted in your pain. But I am Magneto. My pain far exceeds yours, right? The Olympics of suffering. My pain exceeds yours. The things that humanity has put me through exceeds yours, right? Magneto talking about his daughter, Anya, who was basically killed at the hands of humanity. But if Magneto is able to cast that aside and be a part of a nation of laws, why can't Fabian Cortez? And if he's not able to, it's a choice he makes. That's the point he makes here, right? And this shows up when you have Fabian Cortez's argument turns into one of desperation, right? He's like, you need me, right? You need me to be part of your team, right? Your S.W.O.R.D team who goes into space and deals with these missions, right? You're head of your science division who can heal people. You need me, right? It's one of these things where they're almost kind of making this argument of like, we're going to dump you in the hole, right? We don't need you anymore. And so when that happens and he makes this case, suddenly you have Amelia Vaught who shows up, as well as this young kid who's referred to as Cora of the Burning Heart, right? And he says, I am fire in the soul and I am murder in the dark. I am of Arakko. And he says, I am here to take your place. I am your replacement. This is one of those instances when Krakoa is dipping into Arakko and grabbing those people and bringing them in, just as they said they would, to kind of unify Arakko and Krakoa to kind of turn them into a singular organization, right? A singular group. Now, again, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Arakko, make sure you check out my videos on Ten of Swords. That will clear it up for you as bright as day, right? Just because if we wanted to kind of break it all down now, it'd take 20 minutes to do so. The long and short is that the mutants of Arakko are basically long lost mutants. And so bringing them into the fold is kind of unifying these places together. More so than that, it turns out Magneto was just killing time until they got here, until Amelia and Cora got here. And then it's just kind of like, I mean, it was cool to let you talk, Fabian, but I mean, like, you're really here so we can introduce you to your replacement and let you know that like, we're basically just getting rid of you. And at that point, they all blow him off. I'm gonna be honest, man, it's a dick move, right? I mean, they're you have Charles Xavier who's talking to Amelia and he's like, hey girl, we haven't got caught up in a long time. Like, you want to get together? She's like, I mean, we've both really been busy, but like, if there's nobody demanding your time, he's like, no, nobody important. And like Fabian Cortez is just standing there looking sad. It kind of sucks, right? It's kind of a crappy thing to do. But more so than that, what you do is you pick up here really immediately after the fireworks, as we had during the X-Men Gala. We were kind of talking about how you had the main conclusion to it. We covered the beginning and the close. This is one of those instances where we kind of tie into it. A lot of you guys said you wanted to see that. And so you kind of had this bit of a discussion between Dr. Doom and Captain America right now. This is one of the important things to know about the S.W.O.R.D comics, is despite the fact that it's largely tied into the X-Men universe, it's not wholly an X-Men title. It's not like New Mutants or X-Factor or X-Force, where you explicitly see X-Men related stuff. You're going to see a lot of things outside of the X-Men here. The conversation between Dr. Doom and Captain America is one of them. Now, the important thing away from all this, and really the reason why this matters, is because the illusion that, or at least the image that was given to them by Emma Frost as kind of the conclusion to the gala, really seems to show the jumps and the leaps that the mutant population has made. And this basically leads to this kind of discussion about occupying Mars, right? This kind of thing about the mutant population has basically found a way to stand on Mars. And that's when you sort of switch directly to the peak and you have this kind of coming together with regards to this Galactic Council. Now, everybody here who's part of these galactic, or at least part of the galactic representatives, it's big, right? I mean, you've literally got like the chameleons here. I always love the chameleons, right? Kofi Whitemane, I love the chameleons in Marvel Comics. Only old fans will know what I'm talking about, like people who've been reading comics for probably too long as I have anyway. I've been reading comics for way too long. But they'll know what I'm talking about with the white mains, right? The Regellians, the Zenrix Empire, that kind of a thing. The reason why the Zenrix Empire happened the way that it did and Amelia Vaught was there is because the reality is, by eliminating all the competition and putting Empress Kuga in power, what it means now is that S.W.O.R.D can essentially call in a favor, right? They're the ones that solidified the ability for Empress Kuga to essentially take over. They more or less orchestrated a coup d'etat, is really what it is, right? Wiped out the competition, paved the way for her and her son to conquer, and that was it, right? Now they're an ally of Krakoa. So again, it's political, but it's pretty smart. You've also got people here like Smasher, of course, who works for the Shi'ar Empire, but then you've got some very familiar faces. Peter Quill, right? The Peter Quill Star-Lord. You've got Richard Rider, you know, who's kind of like, who's supposed to be the Earth representative for the rest of the universe, but the whole reason why this is called here and the whole reason why they're there is because what's happened here is S.W.O.R.D has begun the process of terraforming Mars and making Mars a habitable place. Now, the mutants of Krakoa are not going to live there. Instead, mutants of Arakko are going to occupy there. Not all of them, but a pretty big chunk of them are going to be staying there. Now, the funny thing is that when this whole council's called, they're kind of like, I mean, this is what you called us here for, to tell us that you terraformed a planet? We're empires who have been here for millions of years. We did that millions of years ago, right? We've conquered entire galaxies, right? And you're telling us about a single world? And the whole thing about Abigail Brand kind of being here is, no, that's not why we called you here. The reason why we called you here is because we have discovered an element, an artifact, a material that actually is incredibly powerful. We call it Mysterium. We're the only ones in possession of it, but it's a metamaterial condensed from certain exotic particles. Of course, she's not spilling the recipe to anybody, but she basically says, if you want this, you can only get it from us. You guys know how Krakoa had basically created medicines that prolong life or cure any mental illness or disease? That's basically what's happening here. That by Abigail Brand and S.W.O.R.D locating and basically taking this material that is absurdly powerful, absurdly durable, and can be used for a multitude of different purposes, and then being the only ones in possession of it, what they're doing is they're coming to this galactic table with a bargaining chip. And they say, you are empires that have been around for so long, that have been around for millions of years. And you guys have interstellar travel. You guys have conquered multiple worlds. Earth in and of itself is largely a backwater planet, right? I mean, nobody's really going to take us seriously. We're just now developing the ability to achieve interstellar travel. Kind of that conversation between Dr. Doom and Captain America, where Captain America said that when he was thawed out, he was asking Tony Stark about whether or not humanity had like traveled to Mars or whether or not we colonized other worlds and things like that. And Tony Stark's like, not really, man. And so this is one of those instances where despite Earth being viewed as a backwater planet, now they have a material that nobody else in the universe has. Nobody else has access to this. And so Abigail Brand says, we will let you guys have access to it, but one, only in the amount that we allow you to access. Two, treat it like a currency, so we can call it the soul instead of like the dollar or the nickel or something like that. We'll call it the Sol because basically Earth exists in the Sol system, and so it's a currency that's unique to Earth's solar system. And then three, we want to be represented, right? We want to be seen as a viable contender out there in the universe in terms of being considered a real and credible world. And so when she says like this world, this planet Mars is no longer going to be called Mars, it's called planet Arakko. And she says, are there any questions? Boom, enter Dr. Doom. And Dr. Doom comes strolling in here and says, yes, I have questions. Like, this is the biggest question I have here is why, right? What's the point of this? You're nothing more than a planner and a schemer. Everything you do is done for a particular purpose to achieve a particular goal. Like you say that Earth is a world that's unified, or Earth has a singular voice for it. He's like, but Earth is nothing more than a world that's inhabited by a series of factions, right? The faction of China, Japan, India, Germany, Spain, Australia. It's nothing more than just a series of individual nations all vying for some measure of power. Humanity is about as far from unified as anybody can get. And now you're saying that this extension of a fractured faction world now exists on Mars, yet somehow a singular person speaks for Mars. If a singular mutant out there speaks for the entirety of the Martian population, then I would hear that voice. I would have that person stand before me right now and tell me who this king of Mars is. Who would speak for the entirety of our solar system to the rest of the known universe? And that's when you have this portal that opens, and basically this chick says, Victor, like, you know what my name is, and many of you have heard it before, right? The Wind Rider, she who swam with a Conti. I, Storm, am the region of Mars. Storm basically is the voice of the entire solar system, and not a better person to choose than her, right? Like literally just the goddess of like life itself, right? Like what better person to choose than Storm? It's amazing, dude. It's so ridiculously cool because you want to talk about powerful, man. See, here's the thing, man. People who don't read comics, they're sleeping on the power of Storm, man. Storm is ridiculous. ridiculously OP because she controls weather patterns no matter where she is. It doesn't matter what world she's on, right? And that's one of the things that's kind of interesting because Marvel's dabbled over the years, but never actually made it a mainstay of her character. Solar storms, space storms, right? Like presumably she can control those too. And you've seen instances where it's happened occasionally and her power's been pushed to that level, but not in a regular sense. I honestly think that's what's gonna happen, man. Now, the only real holdout from everything going on here as far as like these galactic societies, the intergalactic empire of Wakanda, right? Because remember, Wakanda has long since been an intergalactic empire. They're like, no, we don't really need your mutant metal, right? We don't really need that. I mean, we have our own technologies, we have our own stuff. Like, there's really nothing you have that we need. The intergalactic empire of Wakanda is like the sole holdout. Everybody else is on board. And so what you end up doing here is jumping to Magneto at about 3:15 in the morning. The celebrations are long since done, right? It's over, right? The whole gala and everything's finished. Magneto's just kind of chilling there and you know, having a shot. Here you go, old friend, kind of talking to himself, you know, all the power and all the stuff that you've worked for. A little bit of a celebration for himself. When like one of the Krakoan gates opens and here comes the Scarlet Witch. Now here's the thing, man. Wanda is not allowed here, right? I mean, as far as the mutants, like pretty much all the mutants are concerned, no one wants to see her, right? And it makes perfect sense. She literally stripped 98% of them of all their power, right? Like House of M, people haven't forgotten, man. People have not forgotten the events of House of M and like decimation, right? Like all that stuff. Children's Crusade, people have not forgotten that, right? Like Wanda is a cursed name among the mutant population. They despise her. And so it's one of those crazy things because when she's here talking to Magneto had invited her and she went as far as to say like, I got your invitation, but I couldn't face all these people here, right? Not after everything that I've done, not after everything that I've said. I can't be here among these people. And even if I could, they wouldn't have me. And that's one of the crazy things because Magneto kind of responds and says, did I ever tell you about my daughter, Anya? Now, here's the thing about Magneto's daughter, Anya. For those of you guys who don't know the story, right? It's covered one in like the original X-Men stories done by Chris Claremont. And then you have like classic X-Men, which was basically reprints of the old school X-Men stories, but like additional stuff was added in. Because one of the things a lot of you guys may not know is that when a writer submits a story to Marvel, editors go over it and they basically cut out what they deem to be unnecessary fluff. Classic X-Men was putting a lot of that stuff back in, or it was writers just writing in a short little script of stuff they would add in, and then that was basically added into the comic, and then it was just put out there, right? So again, it's kind of a cool little thing, like a director's cut for a movie or something along those lines. And so what this means is that with Magneto's daughter, Anya, she was really the first daughter that he had with Magda, and that there came a time following World War II, depending on what story you're reading, if you're reading like Greg Pak's Magneto Testament, or you're reading classic X-Men, how it is Magneto and Magda met doesn't really matter, is usually kind of consistent across the board. But as far as Anya went, that Magneto had used a forger to create a fake name for himself and got work as in just like a local town. During a moment of a heated exchange between himself and his boss, he revealed that he had powers and then left to go back home. During that time, his boss and seemingly other people around the town had learned that he was a mutant, and so they actually descended on his home before he got there and set his house on fire, and his daughter Anya burned to death in the process. Following that, he lost it. He ended up just kind of unleashing this almost electromagnetic pulse that actually shut down the electrical impulses in their brains and killed them all. Following that, his wife freaked, took off. She ended up in Wonder Mountain, and that's where you get Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Now, after that, it's bonkers. It's Marvel retcon tomfoolery, and well, they're not really his kids and all that kind of stuff. This introduces a massive change, right? Because one of the big talking points that have been going on when it came to the Scarlet Witch is whether or not she was actually the daughter of Magneto. If you go and you read stories like Scarlet Witch and Vision, like the original 4-issue run by Bill Mantlo, it was like Scarlet Witch trying to figure out whether or not Magneto was her actual dad, as he claimed to be. You fast forward to the events of Axis, and it turns out she's actually not his child, right? That her and Quicksilver are not Magneto's kids. And that's one of the things that kind of gets maintained here, that where he largely talks to her about the mistakes he's made with his children, different things like that. She says like, you know, I'm not your actual daughter. And he says, I know, right? So it's not as though Marvel changes and said, actually you are, again, like you're my kid now because, you know, Marvel and Marvel Cinematic Universe and X-Men and all that. It's not really, it doesn't really play out that way. Instead, like what he basically says here is, I know you're not my biological daughter, but you're as good as. You might as well be, right? What's real is not always the same as what's true. And he says, sometimes it takes two to pretend. And so he says, you are my daughter, Wanda. You will always be my daughter, even if not biology and blood. But it's one of these things where there's a kind of coming together between these two, right? Where it's basically making up for all the past misdeeds that had happened between the two of them. This is huge because what it does is it kind of sets the stage for the return of Scarlet Witch. witch in the X-Men line of comics. More so than that, it's going to make a lot of sense out of her character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.